I've had people asking me about where to get hats now that Lids has switched over to being Fanatics. This is the only Fanatics series I like, which is the throwbacks, and this is as close as I get to finding something to match the Oilers. The old copper. I like the old copper. Copper and navy I thought was a nice color scheme. I don't know. That being said, let's get to tonight's power rankings, and there were more weighted results early in the week than later in the week for me. Some teams that concerned me, but the biggest move, I had one team drop by 4, a couple drop by 3, I had 2 go up by 3, so there weren't any really big moves this week, which is kind of how these things are supposed to work this time of year. So that being said, let's go ahead and start things off. Number 31, sorry Buffalo, you finished the year at the bottom. It was a rough year. I understand they finished ahead of Detroit with that win tonight. Congratulations on that. But for me, Buffalo's still 31 out of 31 teams. I didn't put them 32. I didn't put like Beatles Love ahead of them or Abbey Road. And I mean, Abbey Road, that's a nice magnet right there. It's Yvonne's magnet, but I have it on the board here because she didn't really have anywhere to put it in the old house, and it just ended up here. And so that's sort of where it stayed. I should move that down. I don't know if the teams above it would push it down. Number 30, not moving this week either. New Jersey, long season for them has come to an end. And 30th is where they find themselves. For people who are wondering, well, when's your power rankings going to show up again? The power rankings will show up again likely. I mean, I'm going to do different versions of power rankings. So I'm not going to do power rankings based on where teams are right now. I may do power rankings based on goaltending, defense, that kind of thing. When I did the goaltending one around middle of the season, it actually performed really well, and I was doing that as kind of a test to see if I could do different versions of power rankings and see if they'd work, and they did. So actual team power rankings after the playoffs are done, I can do another one, and definitely after the draft is when I kind of look and say, okay, this team I think is moving up, this one's probably moving down, and that's when all the debates start. But I'll only do it a couple times during the summer. It's not going to be a lot. Number 29, dropping 3 spots from last week. Rangers. Yeah, I know they finished tonight with a win over Pittsburgh. Yeah, I'm aware. The Rangers, yeah, they're done. Again, with the teams, from 17 down, they're all teams that missed the playoffs. And I didn't plan it that way, but I looked at that today and I said, you know what, that kind of works. That all the teams that missed the playoffs are in the 17 through 31 spots. And the Rangers end up at 29th. 28th, moving up 1 spot. Ottawa, they almost got out of this bottom row. If they'd beaten Columbus tonight, I might have thought about giving them that because Columbus, of course, needed tonight's game when the game started. By the end of it, didn't really matter. But, yeah, they needed this game. And so Ottawa kind of rolled over, which means you could bump them down, but they were already 28th, so I didn't really change anything tonight. Number 27, moving up 1 spot from last week, Kings. The Kings played at the end of the season like, hey, we got our pride. We need to show our fans that there's something to look forward to for next year, and I think they did that. I think they did a pretty decent job of that, and I think the Kings overall showed that while they're at or near the bottom of the league, depending on what your opinion is on them. I think they ended up 29th or 30th. But at any rate, I have them down 27th, so they didn't move up a whole lot. Number 26, dropping 2 spots. The Copper and Navy, and this is actually the Copper and Navy logo as well. So Edmonton drops a couple of spots in the last week. It's going to be interesting to see what they do in the offseason. And see if things get better for them next year because they need to. It was funny because tonight they were talking about Connor McDavid's statements about not being necessarily happy with the way this season went. And I think it was Elliot Friedman said, you know, there's a year or 2 here where they got to get things better. And Nick Hyprio said, actually, I think it's about 2 months. He wants to see the roster better in a couple of months. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the whole McDavid and the Oilers thing. The Oilers are always an interesting team, usually for reasons Oiler fans wish they weren't interesting, but that's usually the way things work out. Number 25, moving up 2 spots from last week, Detroit. So Detroit ends up here. They did get destroyed by Buffalo tonight, but it was a 8-2 run going into that game. They had a very good run going. Buffalo had won 2 out of 15 or 3 out of 16 or something ridiculous. And I thought Detroit had a nice finish to the season. Take tonight's result, say, oh, well, these things kind of happen, especially game 82. But, yeah, Detroit, there's some hope for next year that things are going to turn around. And, yeah, we'll see where things turn out. Number 24, moving up one spot, Ducks. The Ducks had a good finish to the season as well. I think the end of the season showed just how strong parity is in the league. When you can watch some of these teams play, whether it's the Ducks, whether it's the Wings, and say, you know what, these teams are missing the playoffs, but they're not bad teams. They had a bad run, they had a bad stretch there, but they're not a bad team, and the Ducks are not a bad team, and I do kind of expect them to be back. I don't know how high up they'll go, but I do expect them to be back in the playoffs next year. I think there were a lot of lessons learned. I think there were some issues with the roster that Bob Murray straightened out, and I think the Randy Carlyle experiment went on too long. And I think that next year it'll probably be Dallas Eakins as the coach. We'll see how that turns out. And I know there are some that are going to say, oh, it won't turn out. And there are others who are going to say he'll be great. We won't know until the season starts next year if he is in fact the one they pick. Number 23, dropping 3 spots from last week. You could tell once Philadelphia was mathematically eliminated from the playoffs that they were kind of gutted. It definitely affected their play. The team was kind of rough. And I saw some signs tonight that they were starting to, I don't know, they showed some fight against Carolina in the middle of that game. They are as well good enough to bounce back next year. I think this summer, I expect trying to predict who's going to be in and who's going to be out of the playoffs to be darn near impossible. I'm already trying to think of a way around it. I'm already trying to think of a way where I could say, maybe I could just group teams. Just this is Group A, Group B, Group C, and we'll see where things end up. Just so I can kind of hedge. But now I'll probably hold myself to picking who makes and who doesn't make the playoffs. And I'm not sure where I have the Flyers right now. There are some personnel decisions to be made, but this week was a rough week for them. Number 22, moving up one spot from last week, Vancouver. Optimism's high in Vancouver. There are some who would like to see Benning get fired. There's that divide between Canuck fans that would like to see Benning get fired, and those, including myself, who think that he's had a pretty decent game plan, and I think he's had moves that didn't work out, but he's had some moves that have. I look back to last year, for instance. Tyler Mott turned out to be a decent pickup. Yeah, he's a fourth-line guy, and he didn't score a lot of points this year, but you need those fourth-line guys too. And Tanner Pearson's been pretty excellent since being picked up, and he seems to be getting better. His confidence seems to be getting better and better as the games go along. And Luke Schenn was a smart pickup too. So there are some good signs with the Canucks, and Luke Schenn and Quinn Hughes seem to just click. So we'll see if Luke Schenn stays for next year. It looks like he will. Edler probably comes back too. And the Canucks, there's some hope for next year. And Demko and Markstrom, pretty solid tandem too. So it's not all doom and gloom, even though they're 22nd. 21st, moving up one spot from last week, Florida. Find the defense. The offense is fantastic. Barkov can no longer be called the most underrated player in the league because all the players know he's underrated, all of us fans know he's underrated, all the coaches say he's underrated. When everybody in the hockey sphere agrees that somebody's underrated, they're really not. That makes the person very talked about, and we can move on to somebody else that's underrated, like Danny Heatley or somebody of that nature. But yeah, all kidding aside, Barkov to me is no longer underrated. He showed himself this year, and I think he has an excellent chance at the Selke. I really do. I think the Selke, in my eyes, either goes to him or Matt Stone. I think those are your two front runners. I love Bergeron as much as anybody else, but I think Stone and Barkov should be the front runners for that award. They are both fantastic on the puck and fantastic away from the puck, and that's really the key. Which means William Karlsson should be in that conversation too. But Stone's going to overshadow him. They're both on the same team, so only one of them will get that nomination. Number 20, dropping 2 spots from last week, Minnesota. So they missed the playoffs. There will be Minnesota fans that say, well, finally. And you know what's funny? I know there have been times where teams I've cheered for missed the playoffs, and I've had a reaction of, you know what? This is good because I don't have to worry about the stress of the playoffs. I don't have to worry about the stress that they're going to lose. I don't have to worry about, grueling Game 5 or Game 6 or Game 7 and then just watch them lose anyways. At least now they've missed the playoffs. They can't glaze it over and say, oh, well, we had a good year. We just went out in the first round. We're close. When a team misses the playoffs, you have to say this isn't good enough and you have to make changes. So Minnesota's there. So there will be fans of Minnesota that think this is a good thing missing the playoffs. And I would say that the moves Paul Fenton made at the deadline showed that he was well aware they were likely going to miss the playoffs. Number 19, staying in the same spot as last week, the plucky underdog Coyotes. Arizona, it's been quite the season for Arizona. They end up falling short, but there was a lot of heart in that run. And they got a win over Vegas. They gutted that out, even though they found out during that game that they were out of the playoffs. I still think they need a premier goal scorer. I still think they need somebody who's better. They were talking during the broadcast tonight about Galchenyuk and how Rick Tocchet's looking forward to working with Alex Galchenyuk. I think somebody needs to work just on their offense in general. You look at the guys who've moved on from Arizona and ended up having pretty solid runs elsewhere, showing the offense that they didn't show in Arizona. I think there's something with the Coyotes with their system that restricts offense. This is why their leading goal scorers didn't get to 20, and Brad Richardson's one of the two. So when Brad Richardson's one of your leading goal scorers, I love Richardson more than most, but he doesn't belong as one of your top goal scorers. That's a problem. That being said, moving along. Moving up 3 spots from last week to number 18, Chicago. Finished strong, and they did. And they had that loss to Nashville tonight, but it was a game that meant a lot to Nashville, didn't mean anything to Chicago. It was a strong finish for the Hawks. I do expect them back in the playoffs next year. I absolutely expect them back in the playoffs. The one curiosity I have is just how healthy is Corey Crawford, and just what kind of lineup are they going to ice next year. They have a lot of goal scorers. They have a lot of really solid talent. Did Brendan Perlini do enough in his time since arriving from Arizona to prove he should stay in the lineup for next year? He's one I'd keep an eye on. And there's a lot of question marks on that blue line. Who comes back? Who doesn't? The Seabrook Keith. I'm guaranteeing there'll be some kind of speculation around one or the other or both. And just what their place is with Chicago moving forward. Does Yoki Haru end up coming up for the full year next year? Is he going to be the answer on the blue line? A lot of question marks, and Boquist, of course, as well, is going to get a shot coming out of training camp as well. Maybe they can fix this from within. Maybe they'll have to go out and look for a free agent. Maybe they'll have to free up some money. I think Chicago's close, though. Number 17, dropping 1 spot from last week. And it's tough. It is tough to see Montreal miss the playoffs. And I'm saying this as somebody who doesn't cheer for Montreal. And Montreal fans are like, yeah, we know. Okay. The thing is, this was a good result tonight. And Paling coming in and scoring a hat trick, giving them the kind of goal scoring they haven't really had this year. In the end, when they miss the playoffs, it's kind of for the same reason they missed the playoffs last year. Lack of goal scoring. Their power play, an absolute unmitigated disaster. This is a team that needs more goal scorers. Domi was fantastic to start the season. He petered out as the year went along. Tatar, amazing start. It felt like he kind of petered out as well. They need that premier scorer. Now, Gallagher seemed to get stronger as the year went along. Andrew Shaw definitely showed up as well. There's a lot of good parts there, but maybe Kotkaniemi, maybe Paling can become that go-to guy they need. Kotkaniemi showed at parts this year that he had some really good hands for passing, and he also showed that he could shoot and score as well when he took that chance. And I think Paling will get every opportunity in the fall to show that he belongs as one of the top 2 centers. The guy who's on the outs is Drouin. I would be very surprised if Drouin is still a member of the Montreal Canadiens in the fall. Montreal would have been in the playoffs if they were in the West. That will be a conversation for a while, but either way, they're out right now, and changes will be made. Number 16, moving up 1 spot from last week. Now, Colorado's been moving up, and I know I put the wrong number on the board in the preview yesterday, and I broke people. When I said Colorado was 3-4-3 in their last 10, and they were 9-0-2 in their last 11. I know that broke people. I know it upset them. But when I'm doing these really long marathon previews and reviews, it gets kind of tiresome at some point too. It'd be nice to go to bed at a decent hour, and I'm really excited I'm going to be able to do that starting next week. These marathon, and for subscribers, you guys getting notified on the East Coast at 3 in the morning should be over starting this. Tonight's the last time that'll happen, I would hope. Unless we get some kind of a triple, quadruple overtime, which, that would be awesome, wouldn't it? That would just be great to have that in this year's playoffs. While we're all debating about overtime takes too long. Anyways, Colorado ends up in 16th to end the season. They were at one point down in the 24, 25, 26 region. They end up in 16th. I still have some concerns with Colorado. I know Grubauer had a fantastic run. Grubauer had trouble in the playoffs last year. Let's see how he does in the playoffs this year against the Calgary Flames. But, Colorado had a really good run, not taking anything away from them. And I have them in the top 16. Now, number 15, dropping one spot from last week, is San Jose. And coming into tonight, I had San Jose behind Colorado. Coming out of tonight, I just flipped the two around. But San Jose is not in a position where I see them as being a really, really strong team. And that's despite the truth that they're second in the West, that they have 100 points, that they put together a solid overall season. But it's been such a roller coaster ride for them, and it feels like they're kind of on a bit of a downswing going into the playoffs. I don't know if I can see them getting through a round. They have all the pieces you need. And if Martin Jones in the playoffs this year is like Martin Jones in the first round last year, they're absolutely fine. It's just Martin Jones for basically the entire regular season this year hasn't looked like that Martin Jones. And so for San Jose, I have some concern because goaltending, which was a strength of theirs coming into this season, has kind of been one of their weaknesses. They've been outscoring that weakness a lot this year. Against Vegas, we'll see if they can do that. Number 14, dropping one spot from last week. What's going on with Toronto? And I don't have Toronto in 14th to be mean. They aren't getting wins regularly, and everybody else ahead of them has been getting more wins. I don't understand this. Toronto, to a man, has one of the most talented teams in the National Hockey League. I picked them to win the President's Trophy this year. I thought with Tavares being added to this lineup and just their fantastic offense, their underrated defense, that's right, I said underrated, and their goaltending, Freddie Anderson's one of the best goalies in the league, I didn't see any reason why Toronto would be anywhere near this at the end of the year. It's baffling, it's bewildering. And it kind of feels like they're a team that could go on a run in the playoffs because nobody's taken them seriously this year as a contender. Rally around that, Toronto. The players should be throwing all this stuff up on a bulletin board somewhere that nobody gives them a chance against Boston, so that they can wear that as a badge of honor and go out there and beat Boston. I'm saying that as a Boston fan. When the narrative is that a team completely sucks and they'll always suck, and that seems to be a narrative around Toronto, part of me says, okay, Shannon, your underdog sensor is going off. You kind of need to pull for this team just a little bit on some level, because the 1967 stuff doesn't make any sense since Matthews and Marner in their third year. They weren't even thought of in 1967. Their parents would have been... I don't think Matthews' parents are as old as I am, and I wasn't born in 1967. No, I wasn't. That's insulting. I can't believe you guys would think that. That's just insulting. Number 13. Moving up 2 spots. Dallas. Dallas this week, it was kind of the best of times and the worst of times. I have concerns with Dallas, but Bishop's back. And Sagan appears to be playing well going into the playoffs. He's currently at 80 points. That's where he's going to end up for the regular season. So not, he's not a top 20 scorer in the NHL anymore, and he's not. But he had a decent run there, and Dallas looks like they've got some help. Rupe Hintz had a pretty solid rookie season. Heiskanen, solid rookie season as well, and now they're going to get playoff experience, which can only benefit them. I don't know that I see Dallas getting out of the first round. I can't. Right now I'm not sure. And honestly, these 4 teams, I don't know that I see any of them getting out of the first round. But I haven't done the previews for all that yet, so don't hold me to that until I've posted the previews. Number 12, dropping 2 spots from last week, is Winnipeg. Now, maybe tonight's win over Arizona is going to be the start of something. Maybe beating Arizona tonight is going to be that kind of kick in the pants. Maybe the fact that they didn't finish first will be that kick in the pants that Winnipeg needed. They were playing like a team that didn't need wins. They were playing like a team that really didn't need to do anything. And I, it's weird because, again, this is a very talented team. Much like Toronto, there's a lot of talent in Winnipeg. I picked them to win the Stanley Cup. I did. I picked them to win the Stanley Cup before the season started. And right now I'm going, do they win a round? Do they want to? It's not a matter of talent, same as Toronto. It's not a matter of talent in Winnipeg. It just feels like there's something off. There's something that's not quite right there. And if this team goes out in the first round, Kevin Cheveldayoff has a very unenviable job in that they're kind of in cap hell. And he has to make a decision about which guys are responsible if this team goes out in the first round to try to kick things into the next gear. Because their window isn't closed, but much like Toronto, if you're in cap hell and you've got to kind of downgrade the talent of your team because you can't afford to pay everybody, you're going to have to change the formula a little bit. And while it worked really well for Chicago after that first Stanley Cup, it's really, really difficult to do that. So we'll see what happens with them. And whether or not they get out of the first and second round. I would say if they reach the conference finals and drop the conference finals, it'll be a successful season. Anything less than that for Winnipeg this year, I think, will be seen as a disappointment. Number 11, moving up 1 spot from last week. That's right, not a whole lot of movement. But Columbus, they look pretty good going into the playoffs. Now they get Tampa. So, for Montreal fans, they might be like, well, we missed the playoffs, but at least we don't have to play Tampa in the first round. For Tampa, I don't know how they're going to feel about playing against Columbus. Columbus has a lot of offensive weapons. I think their blue line, probably a bit underrated overall. And if Bobrovsky keeps playing the way he's been playing over the last month, they can do some damage in the playoffs. I'm not saying they can knock out Tampa, but they could weaken them. They can make it so that in the second round, whoever they play, whether it's Toronto or Boston, they could be a weaker team going into that second round. So Columbus is going to be one of those ones that's interesting to watch because, again, they've never won a round in the playoffs. Not once. So the desire to win a round in the playoffs should be huge, and it should lead to some better results. Number 10, dropping 4 spots from last week. People called for it last week, but none of the teams that were behind Vegas were playing particularly well or getting great results. This week, teams behind Vegas got pretty solid results, and Vegas's results were middling. And after the return of Marc-Andre Fleury, we didn't see wins. And I understand, Vegas fans are going to say, well, they didn't matter. Right, but I haven't seen a whole lot from Vegas when it comes to winning games over the last month. And, that the huge bump they got from Mark Stone going in there seems to have passed. And that's something you have to watch for, too. I certainly have been, I've had a lot of comments about, you said Mark Stone wouldn't change everything. He did. He did for about 10 games. And then they've kind of gone back to some of their bad habits. And I do wonder, and I know Subban cost them some games there. Those games that they lost ended up costing them home ice against the Sharks, who I do believe they're playing better than going into the playoffs. But I don't know. This doesn't feel the same as last year. The magic from last year with Vegas, it's impossible to recreate that kind of magic and that emotional connection with the city and what the city went through that October of 2017. Just the huge, overwhelming arc that they went through that season. It's impossible to reproduce that. And so, while I think they likely get to the second round, I don't know that they can get any further than that. I don't know that they have enough to do it. So, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I know their forward group's fantastic. I think their blue line, if they're against Calgary with Giordano, I think, A, that series would be a complete war, and B, I'd probably be favoring Calgary by just a shade, just a bit. If they were against Colorado, that I would likely favor Vegas with, but we don't know yet. Number 9, moving up 2 spots from last week. And there's been some salty fans about how low they've been on the power rankings. So Nashville ends up 9th. They had a good week. They solidified their spot on this list with that win to get the division. They ended with 100 points. Their highest point this year was first. They were in first, I think, a total of 3 weeks. I haven't been keeping track of all the totals. Next season, I really need to keep track of all the totals. I had started this season planning to keep track, and then I didn't end up keeping track of them. I kept track for the first 3 weeks. So, anyways, whoops. And here's Nashville back in the top row. And I think they're starting to hit their stride again at the right time of year. Arvidsson had a great year. Forsberg, solid season. As long as they stay healthy, I think they have an excellent chance getting out of the first round against Dallas. I'm not giving Dallas a huge chance against Nashville. You guys will have to wait for the preview so I can discuss it. But all of the right players that you want to see rounding into form are doing so for Nashville right now. So it's a pretty good-looking scenario right now for the Nashville Predators. Number 8, moving up 1 spot from last week, are the Islanders. So the Islanders will be second in the Metro. They will have home ice to start the playoffs, and who saw that coming? And the funny thing is, and I know Islander fans are going to jump in, and I've already started seeing it of, you said we were going to finish low, and we didn't, haha. I don't know very many Islander fans that before the season were saying, oh no, we're going to win the division, oh, we're going to be second. There was an overwhelming feeling, and it was well-founded, that without Tavares, they likely would take a step back. Barry Trotz would keep them competitive, and then you look at Thomas Greiss. Greiss had a miserable season last year. Leonard coming off a miserable season in Buffalo. We were just hoping Leonard would have some form of a bounce-back season, and that the Islanders would play a good, no-nonsense game. But they didn't really have a star player either. Kind of a no-name blue line as well. What the Islanders have done is nothing short of remarkable. And this is why Barry Trotz is kind of recognized as, yes, the Jack Adams Award winner for Coach of the Year, because he's taken a team that when you look at them on paper, they're not that great. But together, cohesively as a unit, they've played fantastic this year. So kudos to him, and they end up 8th. Number 7, same spot as last week. Carolina. The Surge is in the playoffs, and they had an amazing run in that second half of the season to get here. They were pretty darn consistent in the 2019 calendar year. Now they got to take on the Stanley Cup champion Washington Capitals. That's not fair. That being said, the East was really, really strong this year. You look at the point totals in the East, you compare it with the West, and the East is absolutely just, there are so many really good teams in the East, and you get the feeling there's going to be a lot of wars in the East. This could be a year where we see the Eastern teams just all beat each other up, and then in the Stanley Cup final, whoever represents the East have some injuries due to those wars they've had, and in the West, maybe a team in the West has an easier time, and maybe that helps them in the Stanley Cup final. I'm getting ahead of myself. Number 6, dropping 1 spot from last week, the Penguins. The Penguins, really honestly, at number 3 in the Metro, they had a good season. I'm scared of Pittsburgh going into the playoffs. If Pittsburgh was playing Boston, I'd be taking Pittsburgh, just being honest. I think Pittsburgh is the most dangerous team that we're not really talking that much about. And it's weird because they won 2 Stanley Cups out of the last 3, and there's no reason to think they can't win 3 out of 4. Their positioning, it's not horrible. Their point totals this year, not horrible. Crosby with 100 points. Murray's had a pretty good season. He's had his down periods too, but he's had a pretty good season. Pittsburgh, the blue line may hurt him. Overall, that blue line may hurt him. It depends on the health of Letang to some degree. But they also won a Stanley Cup without Chris Letang being in the lineup that one year. So, could they end up doing it again? Remember, this channel's been around for 3 years. 2 of them ended with Pittsburgh holding up a Stanley Cup at the end of it. Number 5. Moving up 3 spots from last week, St. Louis. The Blues have continued to motor their way into the playoffs, and they've done so in a very impressive fashion. There's a lot of good stories here with St. Louis, and I look forward to this summer doing videos on many of the good stories around St. Louis. While we all want to talk about Binnington and what he's done for them in goal, Jake Allen hasn't been horrible, and I think he's better than he gets credit for. I need to do videos on unsung heroes on each team or players that are kind of underrated now. And I think we're kind of there with Jake Allen. He had a good year. Look at his numbers. His numbers are pretty good overall. St. Louis played better for Binnington, and they've continued to do so. Binnington now gets a chance to prove in the playoffs against the Winnipeg Jets that this isn't a flash in the pan. And with the way Winnipeg's playing, the way St. Louis has been playing, yes, Winnipeg has home ice, which is huge in this series, but that enters into Game 7. So if St. Louis gets a split in Winnipeg in Games 1 and 2, could be up for grabs a little bit more than we think. Number 4. Yeah, same spot as last week. No difference here. Boston. Do I have concerns with Boston? Yes. Depth scoring, a little bit. They have 2 good lines. One of them's fantastic. The other one's pretty good. And then outside of that, I have some concerns. The blue line, I've seen over the last couple of weeks, actually for the last month, some brain farts, for the lack of a better way of putting it, on that blue line. Whether it's like today, Kucherov just splitting the defense. There was no physical attempt to stop him. And again, and people will say, well, the game didn't mean anything. I'm sorry, but if you're not making the effort out on the ice, I don't care if the game means anything or not, but if you're just letting a guy skate through and onto your goalie, that sucks. And the problem is I've been seeing that with their blue line lately entirely too much. They were in the conversation for the Jennings. They're not in the conversation for the Jennings coming out of this season. And I have too many concerns with Boston right now. And Tuukka Rask makes me very, very nervous. Very nervous. If they start Rask, I'm telling you, Toronto can beat Rask. I believe that. I've not taken, people have looked at that preview and gone, oh, he's not taking to win the series. No, because I think they'd go to Halak pretty quick. But Rask, I don't know. Number 3, dropping 1 spot from last week, are the Capitals. The Capitals playing pretty darn well going into the playoffs, which means, and there's no tension about this, I have Calgary at 2, and I have Tampa at 1. This has been an absolutely amazing year for the Tampa Bay Lightning, and they finished with 62 wins. They tied the NHL record for wins in a season, and the Calgary Flames rested a lot of guys that last couple of games they played, but they played very well all season. And they are the number 1 team in the West, and I think they're going to be tough to beat in the playoffs as long as they get that goaltending figured out. And I know Flames fans don't like hearing about it, but there's a reason we keep mentioning it, because there's no one goalie you look at, whether it's Riddick or Smith, and you go, that's a guy who's going to get you through 4 rounds. And this time of year, you have to have that. You look at last year with Vegas, and Fleury got them through 3 of those 4 rounds. Holtby did it for the Capitals. Grubauer was the guy going to the playoffs, and then Holtby took over. So you have to have that goaltender that come playoff time, he's the guy. That being said, let's do this. Okay, so looking at the standings, and what's really important come playoff time is just when you look at the matchups. Now, Montreal finishing first surprised me, but after the NHL stepped in today and they mentioned that overall standings are going to matter, and they said going back to 1917, that put Montreal in first. I had no idea. Vancouver, they have some kind of a mercy rule that allowed Vancouver and Ottawa into the playoffs as well. That's just strange. I'm not sure how that works. Melnick is said to be about $100,000 lighter, and I'm not sure. Bettman was heard to be saying, I'm going to Vegas. We assumed it was early for the award show, but maybe he had an extra $100,000 burning a hole in his pocket. Now, Vancouver being matched up against Montreal in the first round is a strange recall back to a matchup they had back in the 70s, and deciding that they're just going to mix, just allowing teams to just mix together and whoever to meet whoever in the playoffs. Really strange. Now, Anaheim, what they've done, actually having Emilio Estevez announced as the new coach today, it's a surprising turn. I didn't expect Bob Murray to do that, but I got to say that does help put them in the playoffs, because according to the NHL, that's going to add some exposure down south, and that's really important, so the Ducks get a playoff spot. Tampa losing their playoff spot had a lot to do with them making everybody else feel bad. So the NHL said Tampa spent the whole year making other teams feel bad. We can't allow that to continue into the playoffs. We want everybody to feel good about themselves, which made me concerned about why Chicago gets bumped into the playoffs, because they routinely make other teams feel bad about themselves because they love Chelsea Dagger so much. Buffalo surprised me ending up in here. What really surprises me is that McDavid and Eichel got traded 2 months ago, and we didn't notice they got traded for one another. I don't know how that slipped by us, but both of them apparently are in the playoffs. And the Red Wings, thanks to the strength of Steve Yzerman deciding that he wants to have one more kick at the can, and when he said, I'd like to play, can I get in the playoffs? Bettman said, do you have $100,000? Yzerman said, I don't not have $100,000. And from what I understand, Bettman was heard saying, woohoo, now I'm double going to Vegas. So, is there some corruption going on here? It probably. It's one of those things that happens with hockey these days. But it's going to make for fun playoffs. And Danny Heatley coming out of retirement to play for the Senators, 50-07. We're going to bring it back. So let me know your thoughts, as always, in the comment section below. The regular season is now finished. This is the last regular season power rankings. Last power rankings you're going to see of this nature for a while. So there you go. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And I'm done for the night because there's no games tomorrow. I'll talk to you again soon.